Hello, Vicky. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
There we go. Weird comms issue. All good.
It's all right. Computers, they are sometimes the worst.
And they'll never catch on.
No, flash in a pen.
I think so. How many people came back on the invite?
Oh, on the doodle, you mean?
Yeah, the doodle, out of interest.
Oh, I don't recall, actually. That was days ago. I barely remember what I was doing yesterday.
I know that Jacques can't make it, but I was wondering if Noah was able to make it from Spotify.
Not sure. Let's see whether I can pull that up.
I think when I looked, there was like around 5 people or so.
Let's see. Checking. Hey there, Eric.
Hello, Eric.
Noor is apparently available at this time.
Excellent.
Hello.
Howdy, Eric.
Eric.
Yeah, and Jacques is in Perth right now, so it is currently 2 a.m. for him.
It's a little excessive.
Yeah, just a bit. And as usual, we will be waiting for a few minutes after the hour to get started.
Sounds like a plan.
So go grab a cup of iced tea or whatever if you need it.
No, excellent. Hello, Noah. Are you able to hear us?
Hello. Yeah, I am. Nice
Excellent.
to meet
Welcome.
you. Yeah,
Nice to meet you too.
Over Zoom.
Welcome to the group.
Yeah.
Whereabouts are you based, Noah? Is that East New York or?
Yeah, I'm in Jersey City. I work in New York, but I work from home mostly, so Jersey City. What about
Very
you
cool.
all?
I'm in
West
London,
Coast.
I think West Coast, yeah. So we spread far and wide. So I'm in London, Vicky's in West Coast, and one of our other participants, Jacques, is hopefully not dialing in because he's in Perth.
Only for like 3 weeks or so. He'll be back. He's based in New York normally.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Jersey City, just like Ms. Marvel.
So maybe give it a few more minutes. I thought there was 5.
Not sure whether Andrew will be able to make it today. He might be late if he can make it.
Should we post the, I'll post a link to the document again. So we do have a document with notes and attendees and such.
Yes, please sign in. Let us know who's here. And Manoir has joined us.
Hey, Manoir.
Hello.
Welcome. We just posted the link to the document in the chat.
Sure, thanks.
I don't think he'll be able to see it if he joined after you pasted that in. Yeah, Zoom doesn't have a persistent chat in that way.
Should we kick off with 3 minutes past?
Certainly.
Appropriate timing.
All right. Well, who would like to be the scribe today and take notes in the document that we have here?
I can try to capture today.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Manoir.
Tell you what, Manoir, I'll also help and dive in and maybe add a few points as you go, if that's going to be helpful.
Sure, thanks.
All right. There are notes already stubbed out in the to make it easy to see where we're going and stuff. So, new friends, I believe. Noor, you're our only new friend today. Hello, you want to say a little about yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Noor. I'm a security engineer at Spotify. A lot of my focus over the past months has been open source security and supply chain security. So I'm very happy to be here with this group to talk about these topics. And yeah, I'm also here today to talk a little bit about the end user community proposal that we put together at Spotify, which is very similar to has a lot of similar content to a lot of the talks that others have been talking about. So I kind of wanted to merge all of that and make it happen officially. And yeah, I'm excited to be here and get to know all of you.
Welcome.
Okay. Well, the next thing on the agenda is to finalize the mission and goals, which are in a document in Google Docs. Let me drop that link in the chat. And because we've got Noor here to talk about the Spotify end user thing, I don't think we should spend too much time on this document. We can work on it more or less asynchronously. But this morning I went through and took the information that we had previously kind of drafted very roughly. Oh, I can even turn on my video so people can see me. There we go. And went through things that we had drafted and put together a succinct mission goal sort of thing in that document for us to iterate on. So rather than spending a lot of time on this call, wordsmithing this, I would recommend everybody go to this and switch to suggestion mode rather than editing mode, and then make whatever changes you need. And we can go from there. And of course, add comments if you would prefer to do that. And some of the things that we might come up with after hearing what Noor is doing may end up being reflected here. So that's another reason why I don't want to get into this too much today. But do work on this asynchronously. That is your homework before our next call.
And I think just from my couple of reads of it, I think that the goals in there, the 3 bullet points, I think they sort of hit the main points I was sort of looking for when kicking off this group in Austin or whenever it was. So good to see alignment there. It's great to see your document, Noor, and see how that sort of augments that, right?
Excellent. Well, we have then on the agenda, the next thing is for Noor to fill our heads with knowledge.
I think a lot of the knowledge is already in all of our heads, just about kind of finalizing it and contributing back to one document. I think it makes sense to contribute to the group's document and bring whatever we have put together at Spotify into one final document that we bring to the program manager. But what we have done, and this goes back to April, is outline a lot of what I see in the document that you just referenced, Vicky. So things that we needed. Well, we joined OpenSSF in February. We started looking into threat modeling our environment at Spotify and started to our thoughts around all of the OpenSSF offerings. We started, they started to mature, and then we started to test out a lot of those offerings and have some pain points here and there and wonder how others are going about them, or in some cases it was missing offerings, for example. So we kind of wanted to talk to other members at OpenSSF. So initially we were thinking about this as a members thing. And we wanted to see how are other members thinking about this? How are we using those offerings? So we are also members of organizations like Cncf, for example, and we have had a lot of value from having an end user community there, building something like a tech radar, which I totally see us doing in this group for the OpenSSF offerings. What are we using? What are we not? What are our pain points? So that's the first point. We want to make sure that we are able to cross-pollinate in fancy terms, and like discuss all of these points with other members, other end users, members or not, I guess. Now, the other point that we wanted is that we wanted to have a more official way of like we wanted the channel to be able to say, okay, now we have talked about this, we have come into certain conclusions. Now, how do we bring this back to OpenSSF as end users? And what we are suggesting here is having the program manager, Brian, be our channel, and that's something that we'll see how that kind of evolves. It could be that this working group has, let's say, like a co-leads that bring them up in a more official way. But we basically want to formalize what an official channel for us to bring our the good and the bad, and just how we are using those products back to OpenSSF, and think that this will provide a lot of value to OpenSSF, to the other working groups. So that's kind of it. That's like the butter of it, as we say back home, of what we are proposing. So initially, you can see at the top of the doc that I updated it to say that this does not have to be just for members, because when we were initially thinking about this, we thought it makes sense for it to be a member community. After talking to Brian and others, it seemed like that's a lot of operational burden. What we do care about is that the topics are end user topics. And I think that's a very important thing to define in our final document, that like, what is an end user topic? So that's something that I'll make sure that I'm adding as part of our homework. But a lot of people have different ideas of what an end user means, especially for something like OpenSSF. We've heard people say that actual end users, actually all the developers, for example, all the open source developers. So therefore, companies like us are not necessarily the end users. So kind of aligning on what we mean by end users, and also what we mean by an end user topic. Since we are open, what we are saying right now is that we don't think that it has to be members only. As long as the topics are end user topics, we do need to align on what those mean. So that's something I'll take a stab at. And of course, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on it, because right now in the proposal, we say who's an end user. And I think it makes sense to kind of shift a little bit into what is an end user topic. Yeah. And then we see this as benefits to everyone, both OpenSSF and the end users and its members. Like I said earlier, we think that OpenSSF should absolutely be marketing this, because one of the things that we noticed when we were starting to join OpenSSF is that a lot of the member perks were more like coming from a marketing perspective as opposed to technical perspective. Of course, all of the offerings are the technical perks, but we wanted something like this community that we are kind of like naturally forming right now, where we get to talk to others and really share ideas and brainstorm and kind of elevate the security of all of our products together. And I would say that's pretty much it at a high level. One thing that I'm curious to hear from this group is what we think about what community means. Because initially I was thinking about it as kind of like fluid. It's like whatever kind of comes out of it, but it could be something like a working group. And I've heard like other options as well. So I would be super interested to hear more about that from this group. And if you have any questions about anything that I said, please let me know.
That's awesome. Well, first of all, from my perspective, right, I think a lot of what you say just really resonates for, my perspective. It's been a long time that we've been talking to Brian and some of the other community, highlighting that, look, we're really looking to participate in the community in the OpenSSF, really like the mobilization plan, really like the individual working groups. But as you're saying, it's that end user voice that seems to be missing. I'm not going to intentionally define what that means, but it's kind of missing a little bit. And I think the benefits to the community from an open source security perspective and supply chain just in general of actual end users and consumers is something that I think would really benefit the ability to focus some of our directive efforts for where the bigger impact is going to come if we look at it from a sort of end user or consumer perspective. And when we think about it from an executive order standpoint, really focusing on how to address the needs of sort of critical infrastructures, those usually are sort of fairly heavy sort of end users of open source software. But it is a range, right? It's a range right from the huge critical infrastructure right down to others using software. So I think from my perspective, and that's why in that other document, those 3 goals sort of resonate and pick this up. It's getting that voice, that clear, distinct voice into the OSSF and showing what the use cases are for people consuming open source software and just providing that as a benefit to the community. In terms of community, I think looking at the different working groups and being an open source sort of way, I kind of like the idea of being relatively flexible, but anchored back to those core goals within an appropriate governance model. Because often we come from like a big enterprise group and it's like all formalized and it's, huge amounts of documentation, process, paperwork and all sorts of stuff. And it just often gets in the way just in my personal view. But I think a lot of the open source projects within OSSF are starting to mature. And I know one of the points later on is to talk about some of the work we're talking to Brian about the governance model. I think that still has quite a way to go, but I think it would mature as we sort of progress just with OSSF in general, I think. But I tell you what, I'm all for it. And it's great to hear your voice, Noor, and see that it aligns with lots of the thoughts that I've been highlighting to Wipro and to Brian over the last sort of year or so. So great, more power.
Awesome. Yeah,
So
that's
as
really
far
great
as-
to hear.
As far as community, while the OpenSSF governance model is still being taking form, the rough shape is already there. And so we should make sure that we are aligning to that, which means that we should become a working group like the rest of the really targeted groups within OpenSSF, and there is a process for becoming a working group. So that's all set up, and that's something that we will have to resolve after we've had 5 meetings. This is our 3rd meeting, which is why we are working on in the other documents all the kind of the mission, just the really elevator pitch that we need to make sure that we are all on the same page and we know where we're going and why we're going in that direction. Hence the goals that Jonathan mentioned earlier that are listed there. We did a lot of work on that in the last call, but we need that in order to become a working group, as well as having our 5 calls. And then I think some of our first calls, once we get kind of the shape of the group down, which I believe a lot of your document will inform, and probably I will confess I haven't read it all. I suspect we've talked about a lot of the things that are already in that document, but because we're looking for the elevator pitch, they got edited out. But I think some of our very first deliverables will be to figure out how do we interact with these other groups? How do we ensure that there is representation, end user representation in the TAC, in the board, in the other working groups in particular, because that's where the majority of the work is happening in OpenSSF is in the working groups, and we need to make sure that the end users have some say there. And are able to, raise our hand and say, hey, this is going to be really difficult for us. It might be easy for you developers, but for us, it's going to be a problem. That sort of thing, raise the flag. So that's going to be really important, I think, as this working group moves forward to make sure, we're not just doing this for us, we're doing this for everyone, and we're not going to be effective if we aren't embedded. And I think that's a key that this group has over all the others. Other working groups are more or less able to work in a silo. There is some cross-pollination, but in general, they're able to work on their thing and then report back, whereas this working group is very much a horizontal rather than a vertical. And that is going to be considerably different as an operating model to anything else within OpenSSF. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Because while we do fit into the working group mold, we don't really necessarily fit into some of the other molds. And that's another place where our voice needs to come in to make sure that as OpenSSF does mature in its governance and the other modes, that it is flexible enough to support that horizontal reach that we're going to need. And I'll shut up now.
No, that was really helpful because it's something big on my mind, that this channel of giving back, or giving whatever we come up with back to OpenSSF. Is there anything in place right now for this, or any thoughts that this group has talked about?
In terms of an approach to push that back to the other working groups, or?
Yeah, what does it look like to be a horizontal working group? What is the communication model? Are we expecting, I don't know, some of us to get planted, for example, in other working groups, or is there a more official?
So the thing is with.
Yeah, I think that's something that we will need to make sure that we have dotted that I and crossed that T, right? And make sure, and do we need to have representatives in every working group? We may
I think
not.
they're free though, right? So
Yeah.
open.
Eric and I participate together in nearly all of them already.
Right. So we can do that anyway. There's
Yeah.
we don't need to seed or inject ourselves into something. It's literally we just turn up. But I think
Yeah, we just
what might be beneficial is, as we're looking at the different goals and we've identified kind of the focus areas we see from a consumer or an end user perspective, we could target working with or making sure that we do have representation that regularly turns up to those working groups. The one area that I think it may be worth exploring as we're talking to Brian is to get representation into the TAC, or at least a dotted line into the TAC to highlight that all things being equal, this is sort of an end user view, right? It just gives that sort of sounding board that from how people are potentially going to use the technical capabilities from the TAC, this would be something that would be useful input into a technical decision. But I think that definitely needs to be sorted out and discussed openly with the governing board and the TAC as part of the governance work that's still ongoing.
Yeah, that's something that is already, if we become an official working group, then we get that for free because working groups report into the TAC directly. And the TAC meetings are wide open. Anyone can attend and participate. Yep. I'm not a TAC member, but I do participate in TAC calls, and I get invited to TAC Tiger Team calls and things like that. So I think just by nature of our membership already, we are getting some cross-pollination. So Eric and I in particular, I'm not sure where Munawar is participating, but we are already participating in a large number of the working groups. Eric's team is on a large number of the projects. So we are already starting to get that, but we need to make sure that we have it's intentional rather than incidental. Yeah. Right. And we have some sense of where we wish to prioritize our efforts and see whether there are synergy points where we can come together. For instance, with the best practices working group, it's working on the stream one, the education stream from the mobilization plan. education is something that I think will be very, very important for end users. So how can we make sure that that is represented in any sort of materials that come up in stream 1 for the education stream? So we can educate end users on the fact that you are using these things in your software supply chain. Here's how you raise awareness. Here's how you can become aware of anything that might require changes, right? How you can update things, how you can get notified. And that's something that I think the end user working group will be very, very key on, to make sure that our voice is heard there, rather than simply targeting in education developers, which is obviously very, very important. But there's another aspect, right? And that's already somewhat being discussed, the different use cases within the education stream. So that is being considered, but it's just starting out. So this is the perfect time to make sure that we can have representation there and our voice is heard right at the beginning.
Yeah, the aspect of intentionality is kind of where my head was at, because I know that we can join the working groups, but I feel like just by saying that, or just by knowing that, it would not be enough to really share our insights. But one thing that popped into my mind is that maybe in addition to figuring out how can we intentionally go about it in terms of like actual representation and being in those working groups, maybe it could be some artifacts that we produce. So the tech radar was something that I mentioned earlier. It's just a thought that we can now talk about like what that really means for this group. But if we all say that we have these pain points with security scorecards, this is why I cannot use security scorecards in production right now, then that could be something, plus like the many other frameworks and so on that we have. Here's why. Here's the issues in SLSA that we know about, and here's what we are doing about them right now. And so on. So maybe an artifact of this sort could be our way of influencing, plus the other work that you are talking about that maybe people like Brian can help us with.
Well, one of the things I keep falling back on is effectively sort of an architecture, a threat model, highlighting the focus areas that we need to look at from a consumer's perspective, how that maps then to the OSSF working groups. And allows us to then focus in on the particular ones that we intentionally want to inject ourselves in on, providing that feedback that, look, you know, we've tried to use the OSS scorecard, it's great, but it needs these additional things, and then contribute that back, right? And I think by centering on the use cases that we have as a combined group of users, we kind of formalize that and just put that written down on paper. Because I think from my conversations with different end users and consumers, we're not all the same, right? We do have slightly different views on things, and we have different industries that have different requirements, right? But I think if we start to document key use cases of how people are using open source software, using and securing it, and how that then intersects with those OSSF working groups, we could start to tease that out and highlight, look, that's why we're on the best practice group, that's why we're on the integrity group, and sort of link that back to the outcome that we'd expect, right? I think that's really, I think, a key goal, and it should just align how we're trying to help assist and influence those other groups. Are there any groups, Noor, that you've specifically singled out from your sort of investigations over the couple of months where you believe you want to lean in, or it would make sense for Spotify to lean in?
Well, definitely the integrity one. Everything supply chain integrity is something that is important to us. And then the best practices as well. Kind of have been keeping an eye on it and seeing how it grows. Also, I forgot what it's called, but the one that is securing our repositories, definitely keeping an eye on that. All the best practices that are coming out of it for NPM and others is something that we're keeping on. So those come to mind at first, but we are kind of expanding beyond that and seeing what all the, as we evolve our strategy and implement a lot of pieces of it, we'll probably look at other working groups as well. I would say those are the ones that caught our eye and we've been keeping an eye on for the past few months. I wonder if that's the same for you or.
Similar, very similar, but I think it was Vicky's point that my view is more holistic in that it really is sort of end to end, looking at it from a supply chain perspective, and therefore, you know, when you start to map that out to the architecture, you start to pick up that, well, there's actually gaps that we don't have a group for necessarily, or a capability that just isn't even in or being discussed really yet. And that's why, you know, we're starting to build out open source projects that we're going to either just open up or donate to fill those gaps, or at least raise people's awareness to them. Because again, if you look at it from a maintainer or you know, someone like ourselves that are in the open source community creating a lot of it, that's different to when someone who's actually going to consume it. And there's gaps that people need to fill when you're starting to ingest that software and validate it's going to work, right? It's more than the SBOMs and vexes and metadata they ingest. It's kind of how you use that data to figure out whether you want to ingest something in the first place. Those are some of the gaps that we're sort of really starting to focus on and raise people's awareness on. So I guess the other one, I know I'm talking a lot, but the other one I'm really passionate about is that communication back, right? Is that for other end users, consumers, whatever it is, it's not just education on, you know, what secure is and what secure, how to securely write the code, but it's how to secure your supply chain and provide those guides. So I was involved in authoring the Cncf best practice guide, where we started out with a best practice guide for supply chain security. But I think there's more, there's a bigger corpus of data and code that would make it easier for other consumers to follow us. And I think that's kind of where my head's at.
I appreciated that guide, by the way. I know the CNCF's supply chain guide, yeah.
Thank you.
Good stuff, good work.
So good, sounds like we're pretty aligned, to be honest. I think it sounds like we've got a bit of homework, but.
Yeah, I think it's a matter, I'll take it on myself to bring the aspects of our proposal into the one document that Vicky is kind of leading and putting together. And I think we can take it from there. The maybe worth mentioning is that we had the communication channel with Brian. Jonathan was on it and he was very happy to bring this forward. Assuming that we all align on whether it should be public versus members only. And what I brought up at the beginning of this call is that we are not really tied into it being members only. What we care about is that the topics we want to discuss are being discussed. And it can totally be in an open forum. So I think since we seem to be aligned on that, I'll make sure to add our thoughts into this one document and give some thoughts on what this horizontal working group can look like. Like I said, I'm thinking kind of on the artifact, producing certain artifacts level that others look at, and kind of hearing back from Brian on what he thinks, and maybe others as well on what they think. That's kind of how I'm seeing the next steps be, and let me know if there's any next steps that you think we should be doing.
I would like to counsel that we keep the conceptual and the detailed implementation separate in that document. I just added some notes there. There are comments that I've added in the past about you know, deadlines and deliverables and things like that. And yes, we need to figure those out, but those should be separate from the actual mission statement and overall goals and kind of philosophy of the group. So we should certainly document them, and those are things that we will get into our repository once we are a working group and can get one of those. But in the meantime, capturing them in some way in the document will allow us to move them over into the repository once we have it. Just operational sort of note that we should keep in mind. Yeah, other than, you know, just everybody's homework to asynchronously work on that. Again, please try and do it in suggestion mode if possible. I know I myself always forget to do that, but it's kind of like forgetting to branch when you're working on a new Git repo. It's like, oh man, and then you've got to go do all that cleanup. So the next thing on our agenda, and I think we're at a good place to move to this, is updating on, it's Jonathan, next steps for the group following your discussion with Brian.
So I think we touched on chunks of it already, actually. So there was the communication channel that I got CC'd in to with yourself, Noor, and I think it was really to raise that document and Spotify's additional members to the group. And I think the only thing that we resolved that stuck out to me was the private lean versus the public, and I was very much pro public, and I think that's discussed now, and we've straightened that out. So I think that was one initial thing we had to pass. I think that's in good shape. I think the second part, Brian was trying to figure out where this sits, whether it was a working group or whether it sits within an existing working group. Open for discussion. My view is it would be a separate working group, because just looking at the others, it doesn't quite fit, in my view, within one of the others. It is, as we've just sort of said, kind of a horizontal that would peek into multiple different ones and provide different input into them. In terms of concern, it was concern around the potential overhead. Now, again, I think we have very committed members. Obviously, we'd always say that because we're the first people here anyway, but it is frankly part of our day jobs to actually push some of this stuff forward. So I think we could probably allay some of the fears there. Now, in terms of the actual governance model, it is, forming, but it is still very much in flux. The best sort of counsel we've had so far is that, it's the 5 meetings and then make that proposal. But I think there's still a little bit of play going on at the moment to try and nail down exactly the right governance model. There was some additional documentation that came through last week. So I think we can expect to, continue with this approach with the next couple of meetings, and then sort of make a push to the TAC, give people a little bit more time to formalize the governance model, but it's not quite there yet. That's really my update. Not quite there yet, but I think we're heading in the right direction to meet them when they get there.
Yeah, it's not, but I think it's close enough that when we hit our 5 meetings, we're not going to have any problem whatsoever saying, hi, look, we've got all this corpus of stuff that we've been working on, and here's our trajectory we'd like to take moving forward. We've got a very strong story for becoming a working group, and I don't think we're going to have any problem with that. As a matter of fact, Jacques, whom we all know, is off in Perth Dreamland right now. He's one of the initiators and one of the leaders of the repository working group, which is the newest working group before us. And Eric and I were near the very start of that, and we're following a very similar trajectory. They became a working group. I don't anticipate we're going to have any problem with that. So I certainly wouldn't bottleneck us on the TAC and their seemingly endless bike shedding. I understand these things are very important, but there's also perfect being enemy of the good enough. And I think the TAC is kind of in that place at the moment on many cases. But that is something that I don't think we should have to worry about. I think we'll be in really good position to be an official working group. And like Jonathan said, we don't fit anywhere else. And our mission really is kind of an umbrella sort of thing in that horizontal way. So it does make sense for us to become a working group. And that is what, that is the trajectory of the governance model for OpenSSF. It's for things to primarily be in working groups, and then projects under working groups, and SIFs. Those are the 3 things. We're certainly not a SIF. We're not a project under a working group. Well, by default, that makes us a working group. So if nothing else, it makes sense in that way, but it also just makes sense logically, looking at what we would like to do and the scope of groups here. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff that we'll be able to get done without having to wait on the TAC to really completely finalize stuff.
It's certainly got my vote.
Yay. I'm not very surprised.
So next item.
Yeah, which is you again, my friend. Full disclosure, I have to leave like 5-ish minutes early for my next call.
Same. And
Munawar, by the way, thank you for all the great notes you've been taking. I really appreciate all the work you're doing over there. So the next topic is thoughts on taxonomy for supply chain attacks, white paper, and threat model.
yeah, lots of words, right? So basically, one of the goals that I keep sort of focusing on is to try and provide those use cases. So it gives us that sort of North Star about what we're actually trying to satisfy. And when we're talking to people, it's like, here's the why. But also to sort of put that in context, I think it's useful to have an architecture, an abstract architecture, which I've written and published, but also shows people, look, in an abstract sense, this is what an enterprise would look like. These are the use cases we'd need to apply to that. But to define which use cases we want to go after, it'd be useful to then look at historic supply chain exploits, or even just thinking through some of the exploits we are concerned about, or some of the vulnerabilities we're concerned about, and then we can go and then look at the mitigations to those vulnerabilities. Now, when you start down that path, though, it starts to get very abstract and very sort of wishy-washy. And one of the things that I really like to do is start to look at it more in risk terms and try and quantify that risk. So by good fortune, actually, my colleague Jacques presented parts of this last week, or last session, around SIA and the ability of really looking at trying to quantify and measure the cybersecurity risk for the supply chain. And one part of that is really to look at a body of experts, give them effective training on statistics, basically, and allow them to try and figure out how to measure the risk. Now, what I'd like to do is take that, but then apply that to a threat model. And that would give us a better understanding of where we see the risks coming through that threat model, so that we could then help with those use cases and then give us better direction. Now, the reason I'm bringing up the taxonomy is that when you start to do all that sort of stuff, you need to be talking about the same thing. And you need to start to put those exploits, or put those sort of vulnerabilities into the appropriate taxonomy, so that you can start to opine about it. And without that, you just start, wandering around in circles. Now, there's been a really, really good paper. I think it was this year, was it? I think it was in April this year. I am going to try and get a link. No, I'm not, because that's on a local drive. But it is referred to as, I'll tell you what, I might just type the name of it in here, and you can probably just copy it. But it's the Taxonomy of Attacks on Open Source Supply Chains. Brilliant paper. Software, supply chain, software.
Where did it appear?
This is very good question. I'm going to have to, I'll provide the resource for it. But it was written,
I have the link. I have an archive
link.
link. I'll drop it in the
Fantastic.
chat.
Thank you, if you wouldn't mind. Great paper. I'd recommend people read it. But what I was trying to suggest is that if a group, we agree to it, read that taxonomy, but when we're actually thinking, thank you, Vicky, but when we're thinking through talking about our exploits and how it pertains to those use cases, it's useful if we look at that taxonomy, because I think every exploit I've seen is wrapped up in it. And it just, I think, will really make our case much easier to quantify. We're using the same taxonomy, we're showing the same use cases, we've mapped it to a threat model, and therefore we're going after those particular focus areas, or showing that there's a particular gap, or attending a particular working group. So really my ask is additional homework for people, unfortunately, is read that paper and ingest it. I think it's fantastic. And I think you'll see that it maps and connects really quite nicely to that SIA work from Jack. Does anyone, it sounds like Vicky, you're familiar with that paper.
No, I have it open in a tab, but it's there with a couple dozen other things that I need to carve out the time to read.
It's really very, very good. There's actually a website that goes along with it. It's from SAP. I believe, don't quote me on that, Henrik Plate or Plate is from SAP, but they've put together an interactive attack tree that shows you the different exploits from a supply chain perspective, and very, very useful when we think about supply chains and where to focus our energies. So that's it. Just please take a look at that if it is of interest. And my vote would be for using that as sort of an official taxonomy as we're starting to reason about where to look.
I'm a big fan of reusing someone else's taxonomy rather than reinventing the wheel. We were just talking about something similar with SPDX earlier today, and making sure we're reusing the NTIA taxonomy for SBOMs rather than someone actually proposed we come up with our own, which,
Yep.
no, that's a horror face right there when that one came up in the conversation.
So that's me.
Excellent. I love that. And yay, homework. The homework is listed in the action items in the notes, by the way. So if you forget what you theoretically were voluntold to do during this call, you can always go back and look at them. Is there any other business for this call today?
Can I just ask how often we're having those meetings right now?
At the moment, it's been weekly-ish, but it's also the summer, and so people have been gone. So I probably will send another doodle. By the way, I will not be the person who always does this. I'm just doing it right now to make sure that it actually happens. But I will send another doodle probably on Monday. So I'll be pegged today and I'm off tomorrow.
Yep.
Which
so I
means
guess
our next call probably will not be next week, since it's unreasonable to have a doodle and then immediately turn around and have a call. So probably in 2 weeks, I'd imagine.
yeah, sounds good. I wanted to just say that I also have colleagues in Sweden that I'd like to loop in on this, and so we're kind of starting to spread out time zone wise. I guess it'll be interesting to keep an eye on where we all located. Maybe we start to making sometimes like early morning EST, sometimes more afternoon and so on, so that people can, if they can't join every single meeting, they can join every other one or something like that. Just be mindful of that.
Yeah, well, the doodle and everything will end up in the end users channel. So, if you're not there, please join there, and do have your colleagues join, and we can have conversations asynchronously as well via Slack. I'm sorry, Jonathan, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
No, I think that's great. I think it's a great point. Sadly, I'm going to be out on vacation again the week of the 1st. I'm around next week, but out the following.
Okay. Well, we'll figure it out if we're not available. I will try to do the doodle for 2 weeks out, like just not available for only 1 week, but 2 weeks, and then we can see what works for the most people.
Sounds like a plan to me. All right, great. Thanks, everyone.
This is
Sounds like
wonderful.
I ended a little earlier.
Good progress. And thank you again, Manohar.
Sure, thanks.
Bye.
Excellent. Bye all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now. Bye.